Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to show you what I personally think is one of the best drops that I've ever made. Well, this needs a little bit of context. The drop is right over here, but I'm actually going to start playing the track over here because the way that we go into this drop makes it sound very, very impactful. Keep in mind that even before here, the track is very high energetic. We have a rolling kick and bass over here. So really what I wanted to do with this drop is I wanted to lower the energy level a little bit so that we can neatly progress up from there again. Of course, that is usually what the break is for, but I also wanted to kind of extend that effect into the drop. So that is what I'm doing with this breakdown and this drop over here. And as you can hear towards that end of the drop, the energy really starts to rise and we go back into the rolling bass line. So that was the whole idea behind this part of the track, is to really slow down the energy and give it time to build up. One of the main ways that I'm doing that is through the bass line. This is a nice sliding bass. I'm actually going to do a separate video on this sliding bass with all of the interesting things that there is to look at for this particular bass line. So there will be a dedicated video on that, which will be uploaded very soon. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. So I'll mainly be focusing on the other elements. The way that this idea actually started with was just mainly these kind of pads over here. This is kind of like a vocal pad, and then we have these pads over here. As you can see, I'm doing some cool stuff with the scale over here, which is very interesting. It moves this EQ around, and that just allows it to morph a little bit more. And then I pretty quickly also found these sounds over here. I mentioned these in the last video as well. These are like the vocal rising things. And this was really the backbone of the track, but at this point where I was rising into, that is kind of how I wrote it. I pretty quickly had the idea of just completely stopping the track and just having the break kind of come in later. So that is why the bass starts here. That is why all of these pads kind of start here, except for this one, which is just slowly introducing over here. But this is also where the vocal pads start. And once I figured out how this situation over here was going to work and how I wanted to have the break progress when I had all of these other elements over here, once I had all of that figured out, I knew of course that over here the break would end and I would need to transition into a drop some way. And the way that I decided to do that was through this plug over here, which is actually a plug from my preset pack, Psychedelic Essentials Volume 3. This is the Deep Click preset over here. And the main thing that makes this plug over here work is the downsampling distortion that we have on there. For the rest, it is a very basic plug. As you can see, we just have a filter that is really controlling the plugins of it. As you can see over here, it's a bit of a longer plug, 1.16 seconds over here. And the amplitude is set up like this. This, of course, says roughly half a second, but keep in mind that we also have the sustain on for this part. whereas this has the sustain all the way down. Another cool thing that this patch is doing is that it has this sine wave that is an octave higher. This just adds a little bit of extra tone to the plug, and this is what it sounds like. You can see that higher sine wave somewhere over here. And when it came to the melody, the way that I experiment with these kind of things is that I just put in stuff. In this particular case, I started writing with this chord over here, and then I decided to add a very strong lower note to that. And then from there, I kind of just moved that around. And at some point when I decided that I didn't want to have chords everywhere, I decided to remove some of the notes from them. So that is why over here there's less stuff to it, but it starts off very strongly with these 3 chords over here. And that is just a pattern that repeats for every part over here, but you can see that for everyone I made small changes to it, so that it's just a little bit more interesting every time. Now after that, I needed a little bit of a backing element. Of course, you want an element in there that kind of keeps the rhythm a little bit to make sure that the listener knows that there's still some dancing that there's left to be done. So that's where this element over here comes in. So you can hear it starts off as this very lush plug, and then essentially what I'm doing is I'm upping the delay and the reverb that is on this plug to an amount that would be normally way too high, but that turns it into this kind of sequence that I can then transgate. And you can see the kind of wavy pattern that we're getting over here from that, in that here it's a little bit more transgated and here it's a little bit more open. If I zoom in, you can see it even on here as well. It kind of has transgate part over here, and then it has the more open part over here, and it becomes transgate again, and it opens again. And it just repeats every bar. And one of the things that makes this drop actually work is all of that rhythm that we have. When it comes to these plugs over here that I showed before, these have a very big delay on them, which is set to 1/2 dotted notes. And as you can imagine, that lines up neatly with this sound over here. So that is kind of how we transition into the drop with those 2 elements. Those are the main 2 ideas that we use to transition into the drop. And then when the drop actually starts to play, we have another main element that comes into it, which is this kind of sliding sound over here. This is made out of a chord. As you can see, I just transformed this slow pad into something a little bit faster, mainly by changing the envelope over here. And then with a whole bunch of different parameters that change over time, mainly in the effects over here, what you can see is that I'm like slowly filtering it in. I am changing the auto panning over here. I'm changing the delay over time and changing the reverb over time. So I'm really trying to keep the sound moving in terms of the tonality. You can also just hear that in the pure nature of the sound, in the way that it's designed, it always has a little bit of a different tone. That is just because it relies so heavily on sharp detunes, so you get all of those phase cancellations. And because the sounds start at random spots, you're always going to have a little bit of a different tonality to the sound. So now I want to play you the drop with just the main ideas in there. And I'll also include the breaks so that you can hear all of those pads that we talked about before. And you can hear that the main idea is already going to be there. It's going to be very present what the track is trying to do. It is just missing all of the details. When it comes to my details, I have stuff like drums over here. We have like a little tom thing over here. Just a little bit of extra rhythm. We get like a nice snap here, and the snare as well is going to come in. And as you can hear, I'm doing some interesting stuff when it comes to these detail sounds. You don't want them to get stale, especially if you're repeating them as much as I'm doing over here. So as you can see, what I'm doing for the snap over here is that I have delays and reverbs that really add different variations to different parts of the sound. And then I have this frequency shifter over here, which is just moving up and down slowly, so that changes the tonality of the sound over time. So basically 2 different ways of keeping it interesting. Another backing element could be this arp over here. So this is like a background arp for the drop. Again, this is based off the deep click patch that we saw before as well for the plugs. Again, this is based off the deep click preset that we saw before as well. I did make some more modifications to it, but as you can imagine, this layers very well with the other plug that we saw before, this one over here. And again, to drive home the very strong rhythm of this drop, what we can see is that the melody is based on a 1/2 note repeating pattern. And you can see that we have the same thing in the delay as well over here. So the delay is just kind of layering on top every time. And instead of that trading effect that we often hear with that 1/8 dotted note kind of idea, we have this repeating pattern where the delay is really just there to add extra tonality to it. Mainly to the stereo field, as you can see, we have the stereo set a little bit higher. So the delay sound becomes a little bit wider than the original sound. In this case, that is really achieved also by having it set to ping pong, which is of course also what we're using on the main plugs as well. But there's a lot more detail sounds. If I just scroll down through here, you can see there's some detail sounds over here. We have all of these sounds that sit in the drop. We have a lot of detail sounds here in the break as well. This one over here too. This stuff over here is kind of coming into the break. And then here's, as I said, where the break started. So these are the pads that we saw before. We have a few transition effects over here. And then we have some more vocals. We have this really cool one over here. And then a little bit of a lower vocal as well over here. Just some cool sounds to add a little bit of extra character to this part of the track. And then we have a final one over here as well, which is where the transition into the segment happens that actually transitions into the higher energy part. So that this vocal over here. And when it comes to this transition, this is the last interesting bit. This is basically a 4-bar fill. As you can see from my structure over here, if I open up the structure track, this is orange. And this is red, so this indicates the drop and this indicates the fill for me. And you can hear that by just the virtue of the kick and bass being filtered here. And you can hear that that just nicely, slowly builds up into the part where the energy becomes higher. There's some more transitions in this part over here as well. We have this main fill kind of idea. These are just some snares that alternate between the left and the right channel, which is done through the auto panning over here with just these settings. As you can see, you set it to 1/2, and then you set the shape all the way up so that you get these squares over here that look like this. And then I just raise the volume and filter them in from the low frequencies and the high frequencies so that they kind of open up like that. There's another cool rising thing that I'm doing over here. So this is another more of a detail layer. And that then turns into the main element of the next segment over here. So this is a really cool idea for the riser. Again, as you can hear, it is very in tight with the beat itself and also with the 1/2 note pattern that we saw before. You see a lot of different sounds all play on the same idea in terms of the beats, in terms of the rhythm in this particular part. So for example, also with that snap that we saw before, the reverb thing that I was doing here, actually it extends up to the point where all of the other elements kind of transition. So here we can see that arp. And if we follow that arp up over here, you can see that that's also where the reverb stops. So the arp reaches a crescendo over here, and then so does the reverb effect that we have over here. So there's some really nice interplay in that way as well. And of course, this is also where kick drums are, because this is where the beat is. Meaning that whole effect is then again tied into the beat of the whole track. Now, when I explain stuff like this, it seems like I just write stuff like this, but that's not really true. Of course, all of this came through massive amounts of experimentation. I did save one of those experiments, but a lot of them I deleted. Usually I tend to work in a way where I just delete elements, but for some reason I didn't decide to do that with this one. Maybe at some point I'll clean up the project and then this one will go as well, because really I don't like how it sits in the track here. So if I just play it with this, you can hear that there's some extra plugs in there now. And that really just increases the energy to an amount that is not really suited for what I wanted to do. And really, apart from an extra few transitional atmospheres over here and some vocal pads over here, those are all of the elements that make up this part of the track. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play it the final time and see if you can identify all of the different elements and all of the different aspects that we talked about today. So that's the drop, and that's everything that I wanted to show you for today. If you enjoyed this, let me know by leaving a like and make sure that you subscribe to the channel as well. Another way to support the channel is by checking out some more of my videos, so there will be 2 up on the screen right now for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.